Okay, so we're starting a new series today, and we're starting this because of a question that was asked last week by a gentleman who was trying to understand, Nigerian history, and he mentioned something that Samuel Ikoku said, and I thought that we should spend some time on it. Let's go to the topic of today. We had a conversation last week where somebody came up and asked a question about Awolowo's treasonable felony. Okay, people say it also, like on social media, they say, "Oh, Yoruba Awolowo went to prison, he planned a coup," and they throw jabs. Again, not very smart people, but it's what it is. And then he mentioned that he read a book by Max Yolon where Samuel Ikoku said that they went to Ghana, that it was true what they said. So I said, we're going to have a session on it. Rather than just answer the person and say yes or no, we're going to actually have a series of conversations on this matter. So we're starting a new series today, Awo on Trial, why Awolowo was tried for treason. Thank you very much, Cam, for that comment. So let's start where that gentleman started. And he started by talking about what Samuel Ikoku said, and he talked about a particular book. So I'm going to read that book, then we'll go into other books. Okay? Like I said, this series, I could tell you exactly what happened, but I don't think that's not what we do here. We try to actually hear from the people to show you, not just from me. Before people start asking you, were you even there? Let's listen to people who were there. So let's start with Oil, Politics and Violence, Nigeria's Military Coup Culture, and then from there we'll go to other books. Please stay with me. We're going to read a lot of books today, but we're going to have fun. Okay? Let's get into this. Oil, Politics and Violence, Max Yolon. Samuel Ikoku publicly confessed that the plot was real and that they had attempted to overthrow the federal government by extra-constitutional means. Now, Sam had escaped, by the way, to Ghana. We'll get into all of those things. He escaped to Ghana. And then now he's saying that everything that they said was true. And this is what Samuel Ikoku said. We were fed up with the way the Nigerian system, the Nigerian state, and the Nigerian government were operating. We were deeply committed to a change of government, and we saw that waiting for elections would not produce any solution to the problem. This is what we did. We started preparations for it, and the preparations had gone very far, and I believe we would have pulled it off. But unfortunately for us, our leader was so kind to the Nigerian police that he had a police informant among his planners, and so the police knew every move we were making. Hold up. So you read this, you don't have to look for the holes to find them. His own statement has holes in them before we even read other books. So he's saying here that the leader, whoever that leader is or was, had a police informant among his planners. And so the police knew every move we were making. How would the police know what you're making? Because you have an informant amongst them. You didn't mention that the informant was caught. You're making it sound like because you have a police informant, therefore the police knew what you were planning. Let's keep reading. So it says says our leader was so kind to the Nigerian police that he had a police informant among his planners, and so the police knew every move we were making, and so it was easy to trip us up. Well, after the act, people have been saying there was no coup because we went to court. There was no plan to overthrow the government. Naturally, if you catch me over a coup plot and take me to court, I have to enter a plea of not guilty. I did not do it. This is normal. Our leader even became the number 2 citizen in the country. I felt it was time to tell the country the truth so that our history would be correct. So all I'm saying is that yes, there was an attempt to overthrow the government. Yes, I took part in the attempt. Yes, it failed thanks to people like MD Yusuf and co. Then Max Yolon then writes, Awolowo's incarceration was followed by the perpetuation of the western region of an unpopular government by Chief Samuel Ikoku of the NNDP. The western region proved to be battleground and so on and so forth. So here's the point he's trying to say here, that Awo was part of it. This man that was talking was not in Nigeria. He didn't go to prison, by the way. At least not at the same time, because he was in Ghana all the while, but we'll get into it. Now, that's what Samuel Ikoku said. This is what the gentleman that came up here read and said, Ikoku said this. Is it true that Awo actually did it? Rather than say what I think, I'm going to read something to you from Ebenezer Babatokwe. He wrote a book called Awo's Great Life Battles. At some point in this conversation, you will determine what the truth is. So just stay with me. Let's read together. Samuel Ikoku was one of the frontline leaders. I'm reading Awo's Great Life Battles by Ebenezer Babatope. It says Samuel Ikoku was one of the frontline leaders of the Action Group in the First Republic, who ended up as a member of the ruling National Party of Nigeria in the Second Republic. So he worked with NPN, the Second Republic. A very brilliant economist, S.G. Ikoku was one of the students of the famous Harold Lasky, a professor of economics at the London School of Economics. S.G. Ikoku holds a master's degree in economics. S.G. Ikoku's talent as a gifted orator and a radical politician was discovered by Papa Obafemi Awolowo in the early 50s. Awo did not waste much time in inviting him to join the Action Group. Ikoku created history in Nigerian politics when he became the first man to contest an election against his own father, the well-known late Sir Alvan Ikoku of Arochukwu in eastern Nigeria. Ikoku created history in Nigerian politics when he became the first man to contest an election against his own father, the well-known late Sir Alvan Ikoku of Arochukwu in eastern Nigeria. S.G. Ikoku defeated his father and consequently became the official leader of the Action Group opposition in the then Eastern Regional House of Assembly. By 1960, Ikoku had become a major force in the politics of the country. His brilliance, his oratorical power, his charm as a revolutionary socialist activist soon warmed his brilliance, his oratorical power, his charm as a revolutionary socialist activist soon warmed him close to Papa Obafemi Awolowo. It is now a part of Nigeria's history that the insistence of Chief Awolowo on having Ikoku as the General Secretary of the then Action Group in preference to Chief Ayorosiji was one of the causes of the Action Group crisis of 1962. We're going to tie everything together, but just pay attention to the things we're saying. Again, it says here, it is now a part of Nigeria's history that the insistence of Chief Awolowo on having Ikoku as the General Secretary of the then Action Group in preference to Chief Ayorosiji was one of the causes of the Action Group crisis of 1962. At the Just Conference of the party, S.G. Ikoku was unanimously elected the General Secretary of the Action Group. He defeated Chief Ayorosiji, who had held the post for many years, in a landslide. Chief Ayorosiji withdrew from the conference and joined forces with the Akintola faction of the party. A major rift within one of the best organized political parties in Africa had thus begun. One of the highlights of Action Group Just Conference of 1962 was the declaration of democratic socialism as the ideological stand of the party. Consequently, the Action Group Federal Secretariat was organized massively along radical lines. S.G. Ikoku contributed immensely to the process of radicalization of the party. Conservative elements within the Action Group who found the new ideological trend of the Action Group as not being suitable for their class positions did not waste time in declaring open war against the party. Late Chief Okunowo from Ijebu-Ode was to later explode on the floor of the House of Representatives that Chief Obafemi Awolowo was now surrounding himself with young, bearded communist rascals. The Action Group crisis later worsened, leading to the declaration of a state of emergency in the then Western region controlled by the party. An administrator, Dr. Koye Majakodumi, was appointed by the Balewa-led NPC government to rule the region. S.G. Ikoku later fled to Ghana to seek political refuge there. As Papa Awolowo himself said, S.G. Ikoku came out with the suggestion that Action Group leaders, please pay attention. S.G. Ikoku came out, I'll take that from the beginning. S.G. Ikoku later fled to Ghana to seek political refuge there. As Papa Awolowo himself said, S.G. Ikoku came out with the suggestion that Action Group leaders should seek refuge in Nkrumah's Ghana. Papa Awo said his reply to Ikoku was a firm no. Awo told Ikoku that it was going to be most distressing. I'll take that again. Awo told Ikoku that it was going to be most distressing news in all decent ears if he, as the leader of the Action Group, should desert the teeming supporters of the party and seek refuge in a country where he would soon pose a security problem to his hosts. SG Ikoku disappeared immediately to Ghana that same day. So in fact, let me explain what just happened. I will still explain much later, but let me just say that after Balewa declared state of emergency in Western region, we're going to get into how that happened. SG Ikoku advised Awo to flee. Cheyewe says Igbos are fleeing. It is what it is. Awo then said no, because being the leader of the party, it would be distressing for others to hear that Oga Tisalo. So he decided to stay. But that same day, SG Ikoku fled to Ghana. SG Ikoku was to be in exile in Nkrumah's Ghana for a little over 4 years. While in Ghana, Ikoku enjoyed tremendous goodwill from the Nkrumah government. Kwame Nkrumah and Chief Obafemi Awolowo were very good friends. Their first meeting was at the 1945 Manchester Pan-African Conference. The conference was equally attended by late Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya and President Kamuzu Banda, the dictator of Malawi. Folarich says, like, Ifajina ran, Azikiwe ran, Ojukwu ran, Ikoku ran, like it's normal. Anyway, so the writer here is saying that Kwame Nkrumah and Chief Obafemi Awolowo were very good friends. Their first meeting was at the 1945 Manchester Pan-African Conference. The conference was equally attended by late Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya and President Kamuzu Banda, the dictator of Malawi. SG Ikoku soon became the economic advisor to Kwame Nkrumah. This was besides his being a senior lecturer at the Ideological Institute at Winneba, a beautiful small town on the road to Cape Coast in Ghana, and also the deputy editor of the Spark, a radical socialist weekly of the African Revolution. Madam Morisha says Nnamdi Kanu ran but was picked up in Kenya. Running. I don't know why they're not winning votes, but it is what it is. Anyway, so Ikoku goes to Ghana, gets to work with Kwame Nkrumah. He was the economic advisor and was also a lecturer at Ideological Institute at Winneba, a beautiful small town on the road to Cape Coast in Ghana. Then he was also the deputy editor of the Spark, a radical socialist weekly of the African Revolution. Following the February 24, 1966 coup in Ghana, which terminated the progressive government of Kwame Nkrumah, the military rulers in Ghana, led by General Joseph Ankara, arrested SG Ikoku and another Nigerian, Mr. Ayode Banjo. The same Ayode Banjo, the one that... also an action grouper who had fled into exile following the events of 1962 and returned them to the military rulers in Nigeria. The two men were subsequently detained by the Nigerian military rulers. All right. So, here's what we've learned so far from all politics and violence. So SG said that they were going to plan a coup and that they had a leader, and he was referring to Awo, by the way. And then he said that the leader had an informant, a police informant, and that way the whole of the police department knew what was happening. That makes no sense to me. If I have an informant, it's not like I'm informing the police of what we are doing. I'm getting, intelligence report from that informant. That's the sensible thing that informant will do for you, not to be reporting what we are doing to the police. So I don't know how that actually correlates. But we also discover here that it was part of the people that radicalized the party. I'm not going to blame him for that, by the way, because Awo allowed it. They were trying to become more, radical in their approach to politics. And when things happened, he fled to Ghana. We've learned that so far. Okay. So here's a question. Was there a coup? We're going somewhere. Please stay with me. Was there a coup? Did Awolowo tell them to organize a coup? Now, in order to answer that question, we have to go back just a bit. We're going to read a book by Papa himself, Adventures in Power, Book 2. The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law by Obafemi Awolowo. This whole thing about coup, when did it begin, and how, and was Awo involved in all of those things? So let's start with this stuff. I bookmarked it. Okay. Now, there were issues in the party already, in Action Group. And if you want to understand how all these things happen, please read this book, The Travails of Democracy and the Rule of Law. But you can also listen to our series on YouTube. You can watch our series on YouTube where we discuss Awolowo and Akintola. Let me start from what happened on 20th September 1960. After a prolonged debate, which lasted till very late in the night, the FEC adopted democratic socialism as the party's ideology and basic policy. The name was suggested by SLA, that's Samuel Ikoku Akintola. And then he went on to talk about the ideals of democratic socialism. We're not going to read all of that, we're just going to run very quickly. So there were issues between SLA and Papa, and we're going to get into some of those things much later. But I just want to establish something about this whole idea of coups. Okay, yeah. 19th February 1962. When was this? 19th February 1962. There are no trials, nobody has caught anybody, nobody is going on any treasonable felony charge or anything. The first time in my research where I saw somebody actually accuse Awo of planning a coup was not even when the whole thing started. It was somebody that was having a problem with Awo who was already working with the North at the time in history. And that was SLA. SLA was already partnering with the North. How he did it, why he did it, we'll get into all of those things later. But I just want to make a point about this whole coup matter. So this is 19th February 1962. The governor of Western Nigeria, the Ooni of Ife, Sir Adesoji Aderemi, Oba Samuel Akinsanya, the Odemo of Ishara, Chief T.A. Odutola, the Ogbeni Oja of Jebode, Chief Esela Akintola, Chief Osuntokun and Ogundiran, and I met at the government house in Ibadan to discuss the allegation made by me against Chief Akintola to the effect that Chief Akintola was undermining my leadership with a view to overthrowing it. You know what happened now? We've talked about it before. That Awo was the leader of the party, Akintola was the premier of the region, but Akintola was trying to also take on the role of the leader of the party because Awo was the leader of the party when he was also premier of the region. Awo had now gone to the center and it was working. It was at the federal level, but it was opposition leader, but he was still leading the party. Akintola had this idea that since he was now the premier, he should be able to also lead the party. So he was undermining Awo's leadership, and this is something that all historians agree, on. And we're not yet telling you what happened and why it happened, but I just want to establish the fact that it is true that they were having issues already by this time. Okay. They had the Congress in Jos, where Akintola left everybody to travel to Ibadan to go and welcome Sardauna, which was a huge blow because people saw it in the newspaper in Jos and they were very angry. By the time he returned with Ayorosiji, people knew, time was up. They had some issues. We're going to get into some of those things. I think we should start. I'm talking a lot about these things. I don't think it's right that I'm just saying it. Let's go back a bit, please. Let's go back a bit, just to create a proper basis for what we're discussing, so we're not just talking in the air. Let's go back a bit. Let's start with 30th January 62. So of course they've been having issues before this point. They've had I'm looking at the best place to start without going too far, because we're still going to go far later. Here's the summary. Awo didn't want Akintola to become premier originally. He never wanted it. The person that would have taken that role died. Okay? And that was Bode Thomas. He died, And so Akintola became the deputy, should I say president of the party, or leader of the party. And when it was time for Papa to go to the center, he then said, he wanted to have F.R.A. Williams or Akindeko or Anthony Nauru. Those were his choices, not Akintola at all. But Akintola sent people like Doherty, sent Alhaji Gbadamosi, a number of people to persuade Awo, and it took a long time before we eventually agreed. I wish he never did, because if he did not, Nigeria would be like Singapore now. And I know what I'm saying, by the way. And it's not because one person is bad or good. It's just that, when actions have far-reaching consequences. But so that has already happened. Akintola was doing all kinds of things. He will hold press conferences. He will reduce the price of commodities like cocoa and things like that. So, but we'll talk about that later. Let's just go straight to what happened on 30th January 1962. A meeting federal executive was held at Jos. Chief Oshuntoku and Honorable Adigun challenged my right to co-opt some members into the council. I defended my action by making reference to the party's constitution and to generally accepted practice in such matters. Chief Oshuntoku is the one who wrote the book that we read one time like that was, giving scathing reviews of how, he had his own issues with him. I referred to the presence of Prince Adedoyin at the meeting. He had been invited to the meeting by the deputy leader without previous clearance with me. All the same, I was prepared to accommodate him and regard him as duly co-opted. I warned against the repetition of the ugly and barren disputation which occurred at Ikeja on 18th December 1961. My explanation was accepted and the meeting proceeded. A steering committee of the Congress was set up under the chairmanship of Ayotunde Rosiji. 1st February 1962. The deputy leader, Chief Akintola, got permission from me to leave Jos for Ibadan on what he described as urgent state matter. He promised to be back on Saturday, 3rd February 1962. He did not specify the nature of the state matter, nor did he disclose to me that he was going there to receive the Sardauna. 2nd February 1962. I delivered my presidential address to the Congress. It was well received. According to newspaper reports, Chief Akintola had gone to Ibadan to welcome the Premier of Northern Nigeria, who had gone there on the invitation of the University College Ibadan to open Sultan Bello Hall. According to information from the principal, which reached us at Jos, Chief Akintola's presence had embarrassed the University College authorities as he had not been expected. Accordingly, the members attending the Congress were in their private conversations critical of Chief Akintola's conduct for the following reasons. I will explain the reasons later. So what they're saying here is this. They were having a meeting, Federal Executive Council meeting in Jos. Akintola reaches out to Awo, says that there was an urgent state matter that he had to attend to. He traveled from Jos to Ibadan. What he did not tell Awo was that he was going there to welcome the Sardauna. Now, what was Sardauna in UI? What happened at the time was this. UI had this new hall of residence. It's called Sultan Bello. It's still there. It's called Sultan Bello Hall. So they invited Sardauna to come and open it. Why? Because Sardauna is the grandson of Sultan Bello. Okay, the same Sultan of Sokoto. So Akintola decided to go there and welcome him, greet him, whatever. Now the news of what he did gets back to Jos. You see how this thing ties with the coup later. Just stay with me. The news gets back to Jos. People in Jos start getting angry. Like, why on earth would he leave the Federal Executive Council meeting of his party to go and welcome the leader of another party without telling his own people what he was doing? So let's go on now. So the people at the Congress were critical of Chief Akintola's conduct for the following reasons. Number one, the Sardauna of Sokoto was not on an official visit to Ibadan. He was invited by the principal of University College Ibadan to perform the opening ceremony of Sultan Bello Hall. Consequently, it was improper for Chief Akintola to leave the party's Congress to welcome another man's guest in Ibadan. By doing so, he had shown scant respect for the party's highest organ. Number two, the conduct of Chief Akintola made the party an object of ridicule. For while the leader of the party was busy delivering an address, which in part condemned the repressive measures being taken against the opposition by the northern government, his deputy was at the same time demonstrating his tacit approval of such measures by giving the Premier of Northern Region a state welcome, even when the Premier was not on an official visit to Western Nigeria. What is he saying here? At this point in Nigeria's history, Action Group had a thing for the North. They were like head-to-head, they were head-butting essentially. And so they were criticizing the old feudal system and the political structure of the North. But while they were doing that, the deputy leader of the party was welcoming the leader of the party in the north that was repressing action group in the north. So it didn't make sense. Number 3, there was an implied but clear suggestion in the conduct of Chief Akintola that he rated the Sardauna higher in the order of political hierarchy than his own leader. The photograph of Chief Akintola and the Sardauna of Sokoto also appeared in the papers. Congress attendants were annoyed and wanted to discuss the action of Akintola, which they considered outrageous, provocative, and contemptuous of the Congress. I ruled such discussion out of order and appealed to members to exercise restraint. 3rd February 1962. Debate on the presidential address began. Chief Akintola arrived back in Jos at 3 p.m. and told me that he was too tired and therefore could not attend the afternoon session of the Congress. He was excused. But it came to my notice about midnight that Chief Akintola had decided to leave Jos for Ibadan the following morning, on the grounds that, number 1, I had raised the issue of national government in my presidential address, contrary to the prior agreement between me and him that the issue would not be raised. Number 2, he had been attacked by speakers during the debate on the presidential address. Number 3, the Congress had decided to proceed with the election of officers contrary to his advice to me on the point. On receiving that report, I sent for Akintola twice to come and see me so that I could give him an explanation on each of the points made by him. Twice, he declined my invitation. My voluntary envoys for this purpose were Shoni, Alfred, that's Mr. Alfred, Shoni is Shoni Bare, Alfred, Mr. Alfred Rowani, and Prince Adedoyin. On his second refusal, I decided to stand. I'll tell that again. On his second refusal, I decided not to stand on my right. I took my garment and went to his chalet. This was about 1:30 a.m. on Sunday, 4th February. I most sincerely appealed to and begged him in the names of, number 1, our 22-year-old friendship, which might be adversely affected if he carried out his intention. Number 2, of the action group to which we all profess loyalty and which would suffer if he left Jos in the prevailing circumstances. Number 3, of the masses of the people of Western Nigeria whom we dedicated ourselves to serve and whose welfare would be seriously endangered if he left Jos in his present mood. And number 4, of God. I told him I had no wish to enter into any argument with him at that stage, but wanted to assure him that no one had in the open meeting attacked or criticized him. All I had come to do was to beg him most sincerely not to leave Jos as he had planned. Chief Akinloye was present. He strongly supported my appeal to Chief Akintola. Chief Roshiji was also present but did not utter a word. Chief Eso, Shonibare, Alfred Rowani, and Prince Adedoyin, who were with me, did not speak. Chief Akintola spoke briefly. He assured me that he would not leave Jos as planned. That was on 3rd February, Sunday. On 4th February, number 4, 4th February 1962, very early this morning, I asked Prince Adedoyin to go and see if Akintola was still in Jos. He came back and reported rather crisply, but with a touch of humor. Leader, the birds have flown. 84. Chiefs Akintola, Roshiji, and S.A. Tinubu, and Messrs. J.O. Adigun and Duro Ogundiran, and delegates from Osun and Oyo divisions had left Jos by train at 7 a.m. that morning. At 10 a.m., I and the remaining party leaders and delegates attended a Congress Thanksgiving service at the Methodist Church, Jos. As if the preacher knew what was happening within the AG, the text of his sermon was, "Can two walk together except they be agreed?" Amos 3, verse 3. On 5th April 1962, Chief Akintola and his supporters arrived in Ibadan. They were met at the railway station by ministers, obas, and government officials. The crowd shouted "SLA on top" as Chief SL Akintola alighted from the train. Those who shouted "Awo" were beaten up by Akintola supporters who were led by Mojid Agbaje. 6th February 1962, Dr. Akinola Maja, Chief T.A. Odutola, and Alhaji Gbadamosi arrived in Jos in a chartered plane to discuss with me issues arising from Akintola's withdrawal from the Congress. It was learnt later in the day that Chief Akintola was to have come with these men to Jos, but he was dissuaded from doing so at the last minute by Oba Sidi Akran and Mrs. Akintola. The withdrawal of SLA from Jos and his refusal to return when appealed to do so by well-meaning Yoruba leaders were regarded by the delegates who remained at the Congress as acts of gross disloyalty and a clear declaration of war against the party. 7th February 1962. Ayo Roshiji's letter of resignation from the post of Federal Secretary of the Action Group and his secretary's annual report were rejected by the Congress. A memorandum in which Roshiji had advocated the formation of another political party in place of the Action Group was distributed to the delegates at the Congress. In other words, Roshiji said that he's not doing again. He now put out a document for formation of a new party in the Congress of Action Group. It is well sharp. What he did, by the way, eventually cost him something in Abeokuta, in Owode specifically. We'll talk about that later. New officers of the Congress were elected and the Congress adjourned sine die. 8th February 1962. I arrived back in Ibadan. A large crowd turned out to welcome me, but no minister or Oba other than the Odemo of Ishara came to welcome me. At the Mokola roundabout, I was booed by some people who congregated there in front of the NCNC branch secretariat. 9th February 1962. A peace meeting. Please, we are getting closer to the cool thing, so please stay with me. 9th February 1962. A peace meeting presided over by the Ooni of Ife, supported by some Obas and chiefs, was held at the VIP Rest House, Ibadan. I had insisted that all divisional leaders, ministers, and parliamentary secretaries should be invited to this meeting, in order that they might for once know the truth of the real issues, instead of the lies which Akintola had propagated among many of them. Akintola strongly objected to the presence of these people at the meeting. On my part, I made it clear that I would participate in the meeting only if these people were allowed to attend. After a lot of negotiation, it was agreed by Akintola and I concurred, after a lot of importunities, that only ministers and parliamentary secretaries should be allowed to attend. Some carefully selected leaders of the party were also allowed to be present. Akintola made his case, which in the main was an attack on his burlesque and caricature of democratic socialism. I made mine and referred to his extreme disloyalty to the party and his intense desire to destroy me and my leadership of the party. In the latter connection, I referred to the campaign in which, pay attention please, this was 62 February. I referred to the campaign in which he had engaged some, I'll tell that again. I'm getting excited. In the latter connection, I referred to the campaign in which he had engaged among some members like Ogundiro and Oshutokun that I was planning a coup against the federal government. In my research, that was the first time I noticed Awo talking about the fact that Akintola was saying that he was planning a coup. This was in February. So Akintola was there. Obade Sojaderemi was there, some other leaders were there, and I was saying that you've been telling everybody that I've been planning a coup against federal government. The Ooni of Ife, who was in the chair, ruled that this issue of an allegation of a coup should be deferred for discussion at another meeting. Anyway, at the close of the meeting, I had no doubt, and this view was shared by most, that the ugly monster brought into being by Akintola's withdrawal from Jos had only been scorched and not killed. The Obas, chiefs, and elders had found it difficult to be frank. At the conclusion of the meeting, Akintola was asked to accompany me home, in accordance with Yoruba custom, but I decided to accompany him home first, since his house was nearer to the place of meeting than mine. On entering his house, Mrs. Akintola did not hide her hostility to me. Akintola's first daughter, Dele, refused to greet me, but I ordered her to, and she complied. The entire concourse later moved to my house, where they were entertained. We were previously entertained at Akintola's place. We're going to jump February and 9th to 13th February. We're just going to jump to 19th again. Let's just jump to 19th February now. So the other meeting was on 9th. This was 10 days later. Still in 62. The governor of Western Nigeria, the Ooni of Ife, Sir Adesoji Aderemi, Oba Samuel Akisoya, the Odemo of Ishara, Chief T.A. Odutola, the Ogbeni Oja of Ijebu-Ode, Chief S.L. Akintola, Chiefs Oshuntoku and Ogundiro, and I met at the Government House Ibadan to discuss the allegation made by me against Chief Akintola, to the effect that Chief Akintola was undermining my leadership with a view to overthrowing it. I had alleged that Chief Akintola was doing this by disseminating malicious information about me, that I was planning a coup d'etat against the federal government. I mentioned Chief S.A. Osuntokun and Chief Duro Ogundiran as two of the persons to whom he had spoken during his brief stay in Jos. He had boasted to them that if I dared to precipitate any crisis, I would be fighting from behind the bars and not as a free man. Mr. S.R.B. Okoro, who was my press officer on trial at the time, reported to me as having heard this statement directly from Chiefs Osuntokun and Ogundiran. Chief Akintola denied ever making the alleged statement to anyone. Chiefs Osuntokun and Ogundiran also denied that Akintola made such a statement to them. When was this? February 1962. Why am I original all of these things? I'll tell you why. When you hear people say things like, oh, they caught him, they said this, they said that. So I was trained as a minister. There's something called law of first mention, right? You want to try and understand where this thing is coming from. Did it just happen? You have to go back to be able to build a case on that matter. The point is that long before the federal government got involved, long before NPC, NCNC started having issues with AWO, I will talk about it in this series, why they had issues with AWO. Long before any of those things happened, Akintola was already moving the idea that he was planning a coup. So when you hear S.G. Ikoku say that in Oil Politics and Violence, know that he was not the first person to make the statement about AWO being part of a coup. And there's a way the author of that book wrote it. It made it look as though just because he said it means that he did it. But let's just say that we don't really know, but it looks like he did it. There's a way you can pass an information across and have, it's something called plausible deniability. I didn't really say it, but you get the point. The idea is this: the accusation of a coup did not even start with Balewa or Sadauna or Zik. This started with, in February of 62, with, according to Papa, of Akintola actually pushing that idea. Now, again, I'm not the right person that's saying you take Akintola versus I cannot even compare them. Awo is in a class of his own. Akintola was who he was. But that's not what this conversation is about. It's just to establish the fact that Akintola at this point was already working with the North. Why did they work with the North? We're going to get into all of those things in this series. I'm just trying to lay a groundwork for all of us, okay? Now, let's go to another book. So far we've read Oil Politics and Violence by Max Yolon. We've read Awo's Great Life Battles by Ebisi Babatokpe. We just finished reading Traverse of Democracy and the Rule of Law by Papa himself. I want to read something by Odia of Faymont, who was Awolowo's private secretary. He wrote this book called The Forgotten Documents of the Civil War. So let's read something there. There's something. This is going to be a long read. It's not even as long as the next book, but let's start here. So this is Awolowo and the Forgotten Documents of the Nigerian Civil War by Odia of Faymont. What may be argued with some certainty is that many of them could see that there was a plot to expose and destroy the Action Group, the ruling party in the Western region. The plot had begun with the declaration of state of emergency in the region, the setting up of the Coca Commission of Inquiry to prove corruption in the management of Action Group's company, the NIPC, so that the federal government could seize the assets of the company, and then the institution of a treasonable felony trial to settle the question of the party's survival once and for all. Later, the plot covered the establishment of the Banjo Commission to prove the failure of free education, Awolowo's most sensational contribution to development in the country, and the star performance that made his party so impregnable in the West. In spite of or because of the underhand methods that were being used to drown Awolowo, anyone who cared to look could tell that he was more sinned against than sinning. In particular, regarding the 1962 treasonable felony trial involving him and 27 others, any objective observer could have seen that Awolowo had done apart from, I'll tell that again. In particular, regarding the 1962 treasonable felony trial involving him and 27 others, any objective observer could have seen that what Awolowo had in the flesh of the independence government. In the face of the evident plans to destroy his party, so that the coalition partners could chop up its remains. He had vowed that he and his party would make the West ungovernable rather than let the region be taken outside the electoral process. His party began to train people to make sure that no undemocratic victories would befall the region. Let me pause to explain something before we get deep into this. But here's the thing. One of the major things that Awo did that got everybody angry was his incursion into the north during the 58-59 electoral cycle. They moved into the north to campaign for AG candidates in the northern region. And that was actually what got everything scattered. We're going to get into that in this series, okay? What got Sadana very angry with Awo. But the point we're trying to make here is, number one, that the idea of felony, of coup, or organizing a coup, was already on the lips of Akintola. Why? Akintola was working with the North, and he wasn't doing it because he was a bad man. Akintola had his own idea of what should happen in government. Awo had a totally different idea. So this is not to say one is good or bad. You're going to decide later. Now, in order to work with the North, certain things had to be in place. And one of those things had to be that you have to remove Awo, however you could. So they started pushing this idea that it was trying to organize a coup. But in actual fact, what was happening was this: Awo had made a statement, and we're seeing it here, that they were going to go against anybody who wants to they were going to make the region ungovernable for anybody who wants to. Let me read exactly how he wrote it here. He said that he had vowed that he and his party would make the West ungovernable rather than let the region be taken outside the electoral process. In other words, if you're trying to take over the government of the region through rigging and any of those things, they will make the region ungovernable. I will say that. Now, how are we going to make it ungovernable? That's the question. And how do we tie that to treasonable felony and coup? That's what we're going to discover now. So let's get back to this book. Again, I'm reading Awolowo and the Forgotten Documents. No, sorry guys. Someone on YouTube. No, see. Again, like I always say, I don't like talking about our leaders in terms of that. Akintola actually had his own argument. He probably shouldn't have done it the way he did, but there are certain things that are valid about his argument. We're going to talk about that later, but we're going somewhere. When we get to discussing, I'm responding to someone on YouTube, Mr. Olagunju. When we get to discussing the merits of each person's position, you see the validity of his point. However, should he have done it the way he did? And that's why he's more like a person non grata. It's because of what happened in this period in Nigeria's history. Yomi says that Awo action made Ahmadu Bello come out to campaign and vowed never to forgive out. Yes. We'll get to that later. But thank you. You are right, by the way. You are right. Awo went to the north. Awo had gone to the north to campaign, and it was very, very, it was pushy, right? They were doing things that nobody else had ever done in Nigeria's political history up until that moment. They were using helicopters in 1959, right? They were distributing pamphlets. They called it rain. They would rain leaflets on different parts of the country. They were invasive, right? They were doing crazy things, right? Just to try and get people to vote for Action Group in different parts. Normally, the Sardauna would not even campaign, and that's because, you see, is Fulani in that area. Of course, is a feudalist structure, so he belongs to the aristocracy. There's no need for the aristocrats to walk the earth and beg for votes from serfs and commoners. It was beneath his dignity. But he had to keep that dignity somewhere and go on the campaign trail when he saw what Awolowo was doing. There was a particular period when he went to a restaurant, he was eating, and when he got to the restaurant, he brought out his handkerchief and blew his nose and saw dust. He saw dust in the handkerchief, and he vowed never to forgive Awolowo. It's in the book, it's in one of these books, Travels of Democracy and the Rule of Law. We'll read it when the time comes. Just give you an idea how the incursion of Action Group into the North was actually one of the things that actually started getting the North agitated about Action Group, apart from other things. Having said that, let's continue reading now. So I'm reading The Forgotten Documents of the Civil War by Odeofemon. In particular, regarding the 1962 treasonable felony trial involving him, that's Awo, and 27 others, any objective observer could have seen that what Awolowo had done apart from organizing a political party was being a thorn in the flesh of the independence government, as MPC NCNC. In the face of the evident plans to destroy his party so that the coalition partners could chop up its remains, he had vowed that he and his party would make the West ungovernable rather than let the region be taken outside the electoral process. His party began to train people to make sure that no undemocratic victories would befall the region. The party sent apparatchiks to Ghana to train. So the accusation during the treasonable felony trial that they were sending guerrillas for training in Ghana was correct, insofar as it was not stretched to imply that it was pursuant to carrying out a coup against the government of the Federation. What is generally ignored by the narrators of this segment of Nigeria's history, in spite of the admission of its truth by critical participants, is that time was training toughs for armed struggle. It may be a secret to those who never bothered to look at what was happening outside the newspapers. This is backhandedly confirmed by Tanko Yakasai in his recent autobiography, where he retails an added dimension that Nepo pro-insurgents were in league with a Cameroonian political party in sending activists for training in Eastern Europe. This should of course be understood against the background of the struggle in the North between NPC thugs, Jamia Maokata, sons of madmen, who wore wooden or akushi hats, described in Alan Feinstein's African Revolutionary as having semi-official sanction to fight against Southern dominance. They subsequently extended their terrorism to a group of Nepo adherents, so that Nepo retaliated with a positive action wing, who wore calabash helmets and were determined to resist the NPC's routine assaults that saw candidates of the opposition jailed or killed, their houses and farms destroyed, and in the case of opposition parties from the south, whole city-wide or region-wide riots organized to distance them from power. Nepo went beyond a PAW response to Maokata. The party, as Tanko Yakasai authoritatively reveals, already had experience in the training of guerrillas for the Cameroonian Sawaba party. What's he saying here? Did they send people to Ghana to train? Yes. Were they trained to organize a coup in Nigeria? No. Were they the only party sending people to be trained to protect their region? No. Now, this was late 50s, early 60s. You were already losing the plot. You know that the police is not going to protect you. You know that the army, of course, is off your hands. So Action Group was not in power at the center. It was opposition. Now at home, it was divided. One part was working with both NPC and NCNC. By the way, in the beginning, Akintola's group was actually working with NCNC and NPC. It was later on that he broke away from NCNC and focused on NPC. Then Awolowo's group now began to work with NCNC to create UPGA. That was much later. So here is the problem. You don't have any power at the center, right? So if, for instance, the other party were to do something to hurt you or your party or maybe your elections or voting, whatever, you couldn't bank on the police being fair. I have to find a way to explain this without saying a lot, but I'm sure you're going to get it. You have to protect your vote. Let me explain it this way. Does anybody here remember Baba Dejibu? Just notice in the comment section. Does anybody here remember Baba Dejibu? If you know, if you don't, just let me know. Then I'll know. I want to understand where I should take the conversation. You remember him, Abi? Thai currency said we dey laughing wo were. Thank you, Lagos, Lagos. When Thai currency said we dey laughing wo were, that's what he was talking about. They are saying that Baba Debujebu was one of those people who you will use to woo Awantita way back in the 60s. Yes, Olosha Molete. The idea basically is that at that time, your opponent has his own thugs, and he also has the machinery of government, has a police, has thugs, has everybody. You are open. This is not a moral argument, by the way, just to make it very clear. You needed Adedibu. The North had thugs, the East had thugs, the North and the East are the police, they are the army, you are the Western region, you are opposition, you have no powers. Who will protect you? You have to raise people to go and learn how to protect your region, not to have a coup. So when you say he sent people to Ghana, of course he did. I mean, the party did, and I was the leader of the party. And it's not a big deal at the time. Why? Because even the North sent people to Eastern Europe. Let me read it again. It says his party began to train people to make sure that no undemocratic victories will befall the region. Because àwọn tó ń bá fà wọ́n ṣèyàn lásán. English is meant for house. We are talking, we are intellectual. But when it gets to the street, these guys have street guys. You can't be saying hallelujah, amen. You have to also protect your own space. So in actual fact, it was raising a team to defend the quote-unquote integrity of his own space. Just like others did. It's just that they were training people to actually infiltrate and invade other people's spaces. But let's read here. Again, I'm reading the Odeyapemon's book. It says here, the action group, that's Awolowo's party, his party began to train people to make sure that no undemocratic victories would befall the region. The party sent apparatchiks, people, communist guys, sent them to Ghana to train. So the accusation during the treasonable felony trial that they were sending guerrillas for training in Ghana was correct, insofar as it was not stretched to imply that it was pursuant to carrying out a coup against the government of the Federation. So if you say action group sent people to Ghana to train, you would be right. But if you say, oh, they went to train because they're going to have a coup, you are wrong. What is generally ignored by the narrators of this segment of Nigeria's history, in spite of the admission of its truth by critical participants, is that every Nigerian political party at that time was training thugs for armed struggle. Was training tough for armed struggle. Every political party in Nigeria at the time was training tough for armed struggle. Is it the only one who is saying this? I mean, he was working with Awo now, so why should we believe him? So he did something very nice. He mentioned a man called Tanko Yakasai, who you know. I'm sure you must have seen him in the news. It may be a secret to those who never bothered to look at what was happening outside the newspapers. In other words, if you're not a participant in politics, if you belong to no political party, this may be news to you. But if you were an insider, you knew what was happening, by the way. So it says here, it may be a secret to those who never bothered to look at what was happening outside the newspapers. This is backhandedly confirmed by Tanko Yakasai in his recent autobiography, where he retails an added dimension that NEPO pro-insurgents were in league with the Cameroonian political party in sending activists for training in Eastern Europe. Why would NEPO do that? NEPO is Aminu Kano's party. Why would they do that? Because of MPC. Oh, NEPO, Northern Elements, that's what we call them now, Northern Elements in the north, NPC in the north, but MPC have thugs. In fact, let's just keep reading, so I won't have to even explain too much. I may explain again, but let's just read again. So it says here, this is backhandedly confirmed by Tanko Yakasai in his recent autobiography, where he retails an added dimension that NEPO pro-insurgents were in league with a Cameroonian political party in training in Eastern Europe. This should of course be understood against the background of the struggle in the north between NPC's thugs, Jamia Maokata, or sons of madmen, who wore wooden or akushi hats, described in Alan Feinstein's African Revolutionary as having semi-official sanction to fight against Southern dominance. So in other words, NPC had a group called Jamia Maokata. They were the thugs that NPC used. If you read, let me find you a book. I just remember something now. I did not think of this when I was preparing, but this is good. This is going to be nice. There's something that Shehu Shagari said. Mombo, I'm coming. Just a second. There's something Shehu Shagari said in his book. I think it's going to help this conversation, but I really hope I can find it very fast. When did they bring these people in? Was it before the coup? I think it was before the coup. Just give me a second. You're going to love it. You will love it. That's how Ola of Lagos says it, Abi. You will love it. What I want to read to you, I want to read a politician who was in government describe a particular group of people that they had to use to protect themselves in Lagos, even though it was a northerner. So I'm going to read Beckon to Serve by Shehu Shagari. Finally I found it. I was here all the while. Yeah, I found it. Let me read to you guys. You're going to like it. So this happened in October 65, right? The same year we're discussing. It says, in October 1965, elections were held. At this time, I was already in prison, so we'll get back to where we were before. In October 1965, elections were held in the Western Region of Assembly. So into the Western Region House of Assembly, as agreed under the settlement of the constitutional crisis earlier that year. So just going to jump very quickly. So he says the elections were won by the NNDP. Actually, it was rigged. Like, I've read many books on that election. They rigged that election. They announced the result of that election before they finished counting it. So there is no way on earth you are going to say they won. NNDP, by the way, was Akintola's party. Okay, he revived the name of Herbert Macaulay's party that he had in 1923. So Akintola used that name again. So, but we're reading Shehu Shagari. He's saying that they won, but the elections were won by the NNDP, but as might be expected, greeted with allegations of widespread rigging and other malpractices from the AG, itself the past master of the game. Don't forget, this man was opposition, so it's understandable. Although the misdeeds were exaggerated, the alleged pre-election bravado of such figures like Chief Obafemi Awolowo, the deputy premier Western Region, that the NNDP would win the elections, whether it was voted for or not, did not help matters. In other words, Goto saw no, he had said it that whether you vote or not, you're going to win. So I think that was also an issue. But let's continue. A was unleashed by AG thugs and sympathizers who attacked, maimed, and killed their opponents. Operation Wetie. I'll take that again. A reign of terror was unleashed by AG thugs and sympathizers who attacked, maimed, and killed their opponents. When you hear that, you'll be like, stop. How can they have thugs now? You are the one that Obafemi was talking about earlier when he said people that were reading newspapers. So you are the newspaper man. Let's talk about reality. Operation Wetie, by which opponents were doused with petrol and then set ablaze, became rife. So we're going to jump all the way to what now happened to his own people. The unrest spread to Lagos, where AG thugs continued with the mayhem and killings. So intense and widespread was the violence that the efforts of the police to maintain law and order were stretched to the limit. Listen, federal members of parliament from other parts of the federation traveling to Lagos by train did so with armed escorts. Non-Obga MPs who risked traveling by road were robbed and attacked and their vehicles burnt. When it became utterly dangerous, this is where we're going. When it became utterly dangerous for MPC federal legislators to travel to Lagos for sittings of federal parliament, the party headquarters, NPC, Northern People's Congress, the party's headquarters in Kaduna, decided to ensure their safety. Personal bodyguards drawn from a genre of people known in Hausa as Yantauri, which means tough characters, who by some sort of supernatural means are immune to injury from offensive weapons like knives, swords, machetes and chisels, were recruited from all over the north and gathered in Kaduna. Each of the legislators was allocated 2 bodyguards. The party entrusted me with the task of feeding the Yantauri, numbering about 200, while they were in Lagos. 50 bags of rice and money were sent from Kaduna for the purpose. I hired a contractor, Alhaji Buhari Agege, to feed the bodyguards. They were staying with their escortees at Lego Flats, the legislative quarters, whose acronym derived from the erstwhile Legislative Council. Those are the Yantauri. They were armed. They protect, but they also fight. They sent them all the way from Kaduna to Lagos, 200 of them. When was this? 65. It did not begin in 65, by the way. It's been there since before independence. And just like we read now let's go back to what we're reading. So I'm glad I read that. The point is just to highlight that, you might say, Obafemi is Awolowo's big. This man is talking about the fact that, listen guys, we did it. This is Shehu Shagari. They had to quote unquote protect themselves in Lagos. And they brought in what they called 200, and there were 50 bags of rice. Now I hope these things, you are connecting them. We'll connect everything together, okay? So you have to read in different places to be able to make sense of all these things. So what are we trying to explain? We're trying to explain that everybody had to have that group of Eruku, right? They were the thugs that made it easy for you to speak English. And I know it doesn't sound very nice since we're all gentlemen, right? But it is what it is, isn't it? So let's go back to this book. This is Awolowo and the Forgotten Documents of Nigerian Civil War by Obafemi. It says here, what is generally ignored by the narrators of this segment of Nigeria's story, in spite of the admission of its truth by critical participants, is that every Nigerian political party at that time was training tough for armed struggle. It may be a secret to those who never bothered to look at what was happening outside the newspapers. This is backhandedly confirmed by Tanko's biography, where he retails an added dimension that NEPU pro-insurgents were in league with the Cameroonian political party. So NEPU in the north, they were working with folks in Cameroon to send people to Eastern Europe to go and train. Why? Because of NPC thugs. They were in league with the Cameroonian political party in sending activists for training in Eastern Europe. This should of course be understood against the background of the struggle in the north between NPC thugs, Jamiya Maukata, sons of madmen, who wore wooden or akushi hats, described in Alan Feinstein's African Revolutionary as having semi-official sanction to fight against southern dominance. The Yantauri was 65. Those ones came as bodyguards. These Jamiya Maukata, these ones, they were sent to essentially deal with anybody that wants to affect, they call it southern dominance. By the way, if you move mad in the north at the time, the first people that first slap your face and deal with you are these guys. Before the streets will now say, okay, what happened in 66 when Igbos were killed? You can't divorce it from the activities of these guys, because their plan was to essentially ensure that there will be no southern dominance. They subsequently extended their terrorism to a group of NEPU adherents, so that NEPU retaliated with a positive action wing. So when NEPU saw them doing what they were doing, NEPU now decided to create their own group. They called it Positive Action Wing, PAW, who wore calabash helmets and were determined to resist the NPC's routine assaults that saw candidates of the opposition jailed. So NPC guys used to jail, kill. Please read this book. I bet it's a power book too. The Traverse of Democracy and the Rule of Law by Awolowo. You will see what these guys did to action group candidates in the north. They were Hausas, they were minorities, they were Northerners. but they were not in NPC and they were dealt with by these NPC thugs. So much so that NEPU, who they were also in the north, they had to create their own group of thugs. Although they give them a very nice name, PAW, Positive Action Wing. Just the positive. The only positive thing there is that if you bring your own, you collect. Anyway, but they used to wear calabash helmets, and they were determined to resist the NPC's routine assaults that saw candidates of the opposition jailed or killed, their houses and farms destroyed, and in the case of opposition parties from the south, whole citywide or region-wide riots organized to distance them from power. When did this happen? You see this happen in 1953. You see, when we talk about the fact that Igbos were killed in 1953, it's not also, you can also divorce that from this group who did what they did in the north based on what happened in Lagos. I don't want to change the topic, but the point essentially is that they will do anything to ensure that nobody would be able to undermine the political interests of NPC in the north. And now that NPC was at the center, they would also ensure that they will extend their power. So what it means basically is that if you have sense as a political party, you would have to do what NEPU is also doing in the north. You have to do it, and everybody did it. And it's not a moral question, it's a question of survival. NEPU went beyond a PAW response to Maukata. The party, as Tanko Yankasai authoritatively reveals, already had experience in the training of guerrillas for the Cameroonian Sawaba party. In relation to the South, the NPC idea was actually quite fundamentalist because it was primed by the conception of a national army as a catchment of thugs for realizing partisan ends. The truth of this can now be checked against the testimonies of several NPC stalwarts. They had sent several of their young men into the Nigerian army to prepare for the day when the military would be needed to settle political scores. I want to read something to you. We'll come back to this book. I hope you understand the reason I moved from one book to another. Don't worry. I want to explain something. But we'll go use book to explain book. This is from Campaigns of Terror in Nigerian Election by Yemi Babatunde. It was published in The Guardian of 23rd December 1964. This is what he said there. An unpopular government regarded by many people as stooges of the North must try to cajole or to threaten the population to vote for it. AG and NNDP adopted long before the elections the system of creating private armies of thugs under the name of party stalwarts. They are on the payroll of the party. They are mobilized and they are armed with knives and guns. Their job is to break up rival party meetings, to intimidate the population in general. Thugs beat up. This was what NNDP was doing at the time because NNDP and AG wanted splitting by him. Thugs beat up opposition leaders. This is not what I was looking for. It's also important, but this is not what I was looking for. Okay, I found what I was looking for. I found it. I'll read that later. This is what I was looking for. This is from Between the Ethnic and National by Remi Adekoya. For instance, in 1961, it was decided 50% of all military officers would be Northerners, regardless of their qualifications, vis-a-vis their Southern compatriots. Southerners became increasingly frustrated with a federal system that prioritized ethnicity over merit. What's it saying here? It's saying that in 61, the North was saying 50% of all military officers must be Northerners. And Odia Ofemon is saying that around this time, instead of Jesus, God, it's only God that can make Nigeria work. Only God. Instead of just having this catchment of thugs around the place, why not get some of them as your so-called repentant? Finish the statement. If you read Nigeria history, you cry for this country. And the things I'm not saying, I hope you understand. I'm sure you understand what I'm not saying. If you don't understand, may God give you understanding. Let's go back to the other book. So, as at 61, they're having 50% of the officers have to be nothingers. Or has to be 50% has to be nothingers. You tie it with this one, where not only do you have these thugs who are eruku, now you are embedding them in the army. Let us read. They had sent several of their young men into the Nigerian army to prepare for the day when the military will be needed to settle political scores. Evidently, the parties in coalition at the federal level, evidently, the parties in coalition at the federal level were neither true to one another nor to themselves. They saw the destruction of the action group differently. They who were busy organizing insurgents against other parties and using even the state apparatus to realize partisan goals needed to hide their activities by accusing the opposition of treason. Every accusation is a confession. What they're accusing the others of doing is actually what they were doing. Yomi says that was when the lower coefficient to the army to bring in more funds. Yes, now they had the political power at the time. Why are you packing people into the army? Definitely not patriotism. We are reading the book by Obafemi. If you have any problem with what I'm saying, as I'm reading them, I'm telling you their names. As I'm reading, I read I read Guardian. Just gonna be meeting them. If you have any problem with what I'm reading, just saying that Nigerian history is something else. But let's continue. It says here, evidently, the parties in coalition at the federal level were neither true to one another nor to themselves. They saw the destruction of the action group differently. They who were busy organizing insurgents against other parties and using even the state apparatus to realize partisan goals needed to hide their activities. They needed to hide their activities by accusing the opposition of treason. According to Dudley, the NCNC wished that the action group be destroyed, so that they, the only member of the coalition that had a foothold in the West, would inherit the West and then confront the North with a Southern solidarity. Northerners had their own. The Easterners were not just sitting idle. They also had a plan to destroy everything in the West. By the time they destroy everywhere, they will now pick up the pieces and become the leaders. Because they were also having issues with the North at this point. The North and the East were already having their own issues as at early 62. It dragged and became, by the time they had the census issue in 62, another one in 63, and then the Constitutional Conference in 64. So they've been having their own wallahs since 61, 62 actually. So they also wanted to get into the West, and by the way, at the time they already had members in the parliament in Ibadan. So if they could corner, and they were also working with Akintola at the point too. Someone says Yorubas have really suffered in Nigeria. Let me tell you our problem, and I hope we learn. Everybody has issues in Nigeria. Yoruba problem is that Aman Shirawa. See, there's no ethnicity in this country that can say Yoruba people did something at the center to demonize or to destroy anybody's chances, like the Igbos or the Northerners. You can't say that. Tell me where it did not happen. Our own problem is that we'll be fighting amongst ourselves to the point where we'll not be inviting outsiders to come and help us, foolishly thinking that the outsider doesn't have his own plans. So the guy comes, he breaks your home, you fight, By the time you burn down your houses, it will now take from the rubble and build something with one of you, but in his own image. So nobody can accuse us of doing anything, but we create cracks in our own walls because we want to prove that you have a better idea. No sense of collective good. Kini ma ogbe okan lo je fún mi personally. Ha. Ama kan okan no series yo. Mo hindro you. I'm doing it intentionally. Oh boy. Ọ̀rọ̀ ẹni tí ó fẹ́ sùn jẹ tó ń fi po rárá lọ́rọ̀ wa. Thank you, doctor. And yes, you're right, Dr. Badru. Ẹni tó fẹ́ sùn jẹ tó ń fi po rárá. Ṣé ẹ rí mo fẹ́ sọ Yorùbá? Tẹ́ bá wò dáadáa. Àwọn tó lóun fi ṣe aṣíwájú ńlẹ̀ Nàìjíríà yìí wọn Yorùbá. Tẹ́ bá wò dáadáa. Àwọn tó máa ń lànà pé ibi báyìí ni ká lọ, nǹkan báyìí ni ká ṣe. Tó máa mú ìlọsíwájú bá gbogbo ẹ̀dá, kì í kàn ṣe pé ó máa mú ìlọsíwájú bá Yorùbá nìkan o, ìlọsíwájú bá gbogbo ẹ̀yà lórí ní ìlú Nàìjíríà. Ẹ̀yà tó ń ṣe ohun Yorùbá. Táwọn tó, I'm sorry to say, tán fi rán jà sọ bẹ́ẹ̀, àwọn tí wọn ò fi rán tán á bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí pàdé àkókò mọ́ abala kìíní àbábala kejì táwọn bára wọn jà. Tán bá dá gbogbo ẹ̀rù tán, ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ní ìkọ̀kọ́ ló máa bá, gbogbo Nàìjíríà ló máa suffer. Let me tell you something. If you destroy something in Yoruba land, now it has happened several times. If you break amongst yourselves, I don't like saying those things in English. Tá bá jà, tá dá wàhálà lẹ̀ tán, tá bá pín, tí ẹ̀yà kan sọ pé àwọn eléyìí ni máa gbárùkù tì, ẹ̀kan eléyìí máa gbárùkù tì, wọ́n á bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí jà. Tí erin méjì yẹn bá ti jà, koríko tó máa jẹyẹ kì í ṣe koríko ilẹ̀ Yorùbá o, koríko Nàìjíríà ló máa jẹyẹ. And I will tell you this, ìjà gbọ́n mi sí omi ò tó mo jù ẹ lọ èmi jù ẹ àmì gbogbo wọn lọ bá káàkiri gbà yẹn. Òun kọ́ ló jẹ́ káwọn èèyàn lọ ṣe kú o, òun kọ́ ló jẹ́ káwọn àwọn tó ṣe rí àwọn Igbo ó ní nǹkan táwọn fẹ́ ṣe ń tira wọn. In fact, let me switch to English. The Igbos had a plan since 1944 to dominate Nigeria. They had their own plan. We, when planning to dominate anybody, we're trying to make things better for our people. But because of the uniqueness of our leaders, people will see what we're doing and they will begin to copy it. So what that means basically is this: you were called to be a pace setter, an example and a model for others. You're not trying to compete, you're just doing stuff. As you're doing, like, how come you're doing this kind of thing? You're building the first stadium on the continent at that level, right? You're having the first civil station on the continent in 1959, before France, before Ireland. Everybody's wondering, what are these guys doing? You're building the tallest building in West Africa. They want to copy, which is beautiful. As you are doing it, they are also copying, is developing, because you are doing it, you're taking initiative, they are seeing what you're doing and they're copying it. Therefore, the entire country is growing. You, who were supposed to now be the pace setter, you're now fighting amongst yourselves. The ones who are supposed to be copying you now are supporting either one or the other. When they destroy your region, they're not destroying your region. This is the problem with people that actually fight Southwest or Yoruba people in Nigeria. If it will not happen again, by the way, but if you, whenever it had happened, successfully destroy whatever was happening in Yoruba land, what you are doing is causing the entire country to retrogress. You are going to retrogress because you have nobody to look up to and you cannot be the pace setter. You were not made to be so. If you have a feudalist society, you cannot be the pace setter. If you have a society where there's no order or hierarchy, clear hierarchy, you cannot be the pace setter. So neither the North nor the East was designed to be pace setter. I am not making anything up. I'm not even saying it because I'm Yoruba. It's just what it is. So whenever Yoruba people fight amongst themselves, what they are doing is not just to destroy Yoruba people, it's to destroy the entire country. And it's not, when I say destroy, not like they're going to burn anything down, but you will not make progress. You cannot. I'm still thinking about it. Give me 5 things that came out of certain parts of Nigeria that all of us are copying because it came out from those places since independence. 5 things from the East. So it doesn't look like theory. Tell me 5 things that the East produced that we all began to do after the East did it. Tell me 5 things from the North. It's grace. And it's not grace to be proud of and say, oh, I'm the one that God has called. That's not the point. The point is just that you are, because of your history, because of the circumstances surrounding the formation of your identity, because of your journey, because of everything, you have been positioned in such a way. You had access to education before another group. This is the fact. You had access. You have many of the problems that Nigeria is trying to surmount. You have surmounted. If Yoruba people if our head was just straight, Malaysia will just be looking up. We'll be looking up now. Which is why I'm very careful with all this nonsense that people do. What you are doing will not just affect your family. It can all this before gay. All this me go to bafun. I cannot agree that I cannot agree. Forget and let us build and stop being a nuisance. And that's what people are doing. Instead of just following the order and building according to the structure, you want to usurp somebody's authority and decide that you also have an idea. And the idea you have is not going to build anything. Just be fighting over supremacy. Rubbish nonsense that we're doing all over the place. I'm angry. I'm angry because we don't understand how little things like this can affect an entire generation. Look at us. And look at Nigeria. As bad as it bad, she better for a while. But she bad though, she better for at least now. You say come and do VAT now. You say remove Lagos. Oyo State has almost ×3 of the entire southeastern VAT. So she that, but we cannot be comparing ourselves with those who are less. You just wonder what could have happened. What would we have been as Yoruba people and as Nigeria? I'm just saying this, right? We've got to be smart as Yoruba. All this bickering. If somebody is doing something you don't agree with, just leave the person alone. Go and do your own. But the idea of let's say this crab mentality, pull him down, I also have to prove a point, is nonsense. And we do it. But anybody that does it will not succeed. You will spend your lifetime building stuff that will not grow, because you cannot destroy the collective good of Yoruba people and Nigeria because of your own ego. It will not work. Thank you, Tigil. Because this I'm trying to say a lot of things without saying some things. So if you see me repeating some things, because I don't want to say certain things. Some people just they have no, by the way, ask them for ideas. They don't have anything. Listen to them speak. No special ideas, nothing that can actually build the society. Just retarded. The idea basically is that they want to feel that they are clinical, and in feeling that's their goal in life. Ajoni Bini. The idea that kila le ṣe tó lè ràn gbogbo àwọn ará ìlú lọ́wọ́ à ń rò, or àwọn kò kí ń rò. Èmi jù ẹ́, ìwọ jù mí. On top of ìrègbè. Kò dé pé bí wọ́n ti kọ́ kankan nísìnyí báyìí pé gbogbo ayé nọ́mbọ̀ àsọdọ̀ wa torí nǹkan tá a ti kọ́. Kọ́ kankan akànjájà pònú ni. And I'm saying this because tẹ́ máa ń sọ̀rọ̀ pé àwọn kan ń ṣe kan, àwọn kan ń ṣe kan. Ẹ kàn bára wa náà sòótọ́ ọ̀rọ̀. We don't have the history of going to the north to try and destroy something, or going to the east and saying we want to dominate. Number one, what's there to dominate? The point is, what we are doing wrong, we should also tell ourselves the truth. And it should stop. Somebody's writing in the comment section. I say, oh, you're writing in the comment section. You're right. You're very correct. You mentioned the person. You are very correct. I just want to mention it. which was what Pastor Bakari was referring to early this year. I'm sorry, last year, 2025, when they invited him to join AGC. That was what he said. Let me tell you what he said. He said, this is what he said. He said, we are not going to have another Awolowo and Akintola in the Southwest. That's what Pastor Bakari said. I said, that's good. That's the person that understands politics, understands the political history of Nigeria. If you go and do Awolowo and Akintola, it's not just about Yoruba land. It will affect all of us. We will now become the kings amongst Lungu. You know, the kings of the Lungu. You look around the Lungu, all of them are not skinny, but you have a skyscraper. Yasipo. Olowo kan láàrin otoshi mefa otoshi. That's what my father used to say when I was young, and it's true. Someone says regional autonomy without the tension a bit. That was regional autonomy when this thing happened. There was regional autonomy when this happened. Regional autonomy is not a magic wand. Like once you just wave this wand like this, everything's. There was regional autonomy when this happened. It's human nature. We need that autonomy, by the way. I agree with you. But what I'm talking about is not even about the autonomy. It's about that thing that can just say, Eje agba farawa, ekile sholori, ekagbarukuti, kili mo le se to ye ki nkan to nse ko da. Tó bá ní nǹkan tí wàá fi kún nǹkan tó ń ṣe, má fò lè ṣe kankan, ṣára fi wọ́n lẹ̀. Kíkó wàá máa gbìyànjú àti máa dì wọ́n lẹ́sẹ̀. Just to prove a point that makes no sense. By the way, I've not mentioned anybody, but you know exactly what I'm saying, and I hope we get the message. We have to do better as Yoruba people. Thank you very much for understanding. Now let's go back to the reading. Time to law. I have about 3 books I was supposed to do in this part 2, because there are other books for next part. But wherever we stop, we'll continue from there. What have we learned so far? We've learned that while it is true that Action Group sent people to Ghana, they did not send people to Ghana to go and plan to overthrow any government. What they were doing in Ghana was what NEPU was doing in Eastern Europe with the Cameroonian party. And the idea basically was that every region had like a group of people that had to protect their votes or political parties. And if NEPU had to do it, you have to understand that NEPU having, what do they call that thing? PAW. NEPU having positive action wing, because of the activities of NPC, their own thugs, tells you exactly how politics worked back then. You had to protect your space. And if you ask me, there's absolutely nothing wrong with what I did.